Hello, and welcome to Dissecting Philosophy with Dr. McDonald. In this episode, I'm going to go over and have a general discussion and talk about what we've covered so far in part one of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So it's a nice way to tie everything together and have a look at what's generally discussed as well in part one before we move on to part two. So in part one, everything sort of revolves around the initial section talking about the camel, the lion, and the child, and the whole idea about creation of new values and creativity, and what does it mean to create new things and new ideas. And what does the camel mean again, as a little refresher. The camel is our burdens that is placed upon us by society, by social and cultural norms that's placed upon us with herd mentality, in the sense of whatever somebody says is going to adhere to those norms of society and culture. Everybody just follow around in a very general sense, whatever the idea is, and sort of just accept it at face value. And then the lion, of course, is the person that does battle with those norms and ideas, in a sense of having a great battle and conflict with a whole history as well at the same time. And we also get this whole sense as well in part one, where anybody tries to create anything new, then you have to almost go to war and become a warrior, as he says as well, in order to then develop your own ideas and opinions about things. And it's not in just a little way of just being able to arrive at you as a person with your own beliefs and opinions, but rather doing a battle with a dragon that we have in the initial section. So a big behemoth monster that's almost completely impossible to overcome. And then we have the image of the child, then, which is an image in which we have this whole sense of forgetfulness and getting rid of any idea of resentment and hatred, and allowing for what's ever created anew to be pure in a way and free from any sort of idea of revenge against anything. And so why do we have all this focus upon creativity? Why do we have all this focus upon new values? Is because we have Nietzsche trying to move towards a new way of thinking, away from how we traditionally think within philosophy, which is the whole idea of a creation of a metaphysics. What does that allow for? Is ultimately for us to base our ideas and knowledge and ethical models and how we should act all upon a pure ideas and pure principles for about things. And those ideas and truths will always be correct, cannot be called into question, because it's based upon completely a logical argument that's airtight. And so we have Nietzsche questioning this traditional way of doing things and this traditional way of doing things within philosophy to move towards these concepts and ideals, and at the same time wants to produce his own set of concepts and ideas, but towards life and the world and the body, and away from a metaphysics. And what is so problematical about metaphysics as well is that it focuses so much upon the afterlife and death, and Nietzsche's move is precisely the opposite of that, more focused back into living life now, enjoying life now, and move back into the world again. So then we also have the problem of, well, if you're going to create values and new ideas for things as well, you can say, well, you don't have to create anything from scratch. You can just return back to old models and old values and old way of doing things, in the sense of, let's say, a contemporary idea for doing things doesn't work, therefore we can move back to a previous model for doing things. Or if it's in terms of philosophy sense of doing things as well, we could say, well, let's say new contemporary philosopher comes up with an idea, it's complete rubbish. Who can we say is much better than that? Let's move back to a previous model because I much more prefer how they do things. And what Nietzsche allows us to reflect upon as well is that what does creativity ultimately mean is not just simply when we create things, we just want to move towards this whole idea of doing something new and then move back again, but rather the very process of creativity involves a reaction to your society and ideals and way of doing things a given time period. And so if you were to suddenly say an old way of doing things is better than the new way of doing things, then it would say, well, potentially there's good things, of course, about a previous model and way of doing things. However, that model was responding to specific things in that given time period, and it's going to work within the context of responding to those things within that very specific time period. If we take a model from that period, we're going to have to change it and update it in some way and make it work and function so it's practical in a contemporary setting. So you can't just suddenly take something from the past and then make it work in the future, because it will just not work in a sense of, well, you can't just suddenly take past values and past ideas for things and then suddenly say, this is a great idea now. Potentially it's got great things of what it wants to say, of course, but it's not going to be responding to, involved in all the contemporary cultural, social problems, political problems, and so on that's happening within contemporary society. And then we also have Nietzsche say, well, if we're going to have this move towards creativity and wanting new values and a new way of doing things, what is so problematical about this move towards afterlife and death and a whole religious outlook for doing things? Why is that so problematical for us? Because you could argue against Nietzsche here that the Christian ethics way of doing things, at least historically, has argued for a concrete ethical model. That ethical model allows people to live their life in a good way. And we had that fantastic section on loving one's neighbor in part 1 as well. That's a great example in which we could say, well, by acting selflessly, then we allow us to help another person regardless of their race, regardless of their culture, regardless of their background. And then you can just go and help that person and take care of that person if they're in need. And that's what we could say, well, at least from a Christian side of things, what's been so good about the whole model in the first place is it allows us to act in a good way that take care of other people. And then you go on the Nietzsche side of things to say, well, of course, just the act of taking care of people and being helpful towards others is not a bad action to take whatsoever, but it's like what we said as well in the loving our neighbor section as well, because it's that focus on the afterlife and death. It's like you earn merit points for yourself for every good deed you do in order to then achieve the best form of the afterlife for yourself. And so it kind of devalues the situation and the act of care that you're providing, because you're not providing care for care's sake, but providing care with the potential future prospect of having a great afterlife at the same time. And then we have this great psychological makeup and psychological sort of profiling that Nietzsche does as well in part 1 to say, well, the more we focus on death and the afterlife and the people who have created the concepts and ideas for the afterlife and the move towards the soul within philosophy away from our bodies, let's have a look at all this from a psychological point of view and think just for a minute, that's really harmful here. And the people that have been thinking about this are in a mental state that's not mentally well for themselves. And the great example is that of Socrates at the end of his life in Phaedo, where he wants to die and he wants to just drink the hemlock until it gets the job done. Nietzsche says, well, here we have the whole argument for the emphasis upon the soul and death and wanting to die. And of course, we have the historical importance of that having a significant impact upon how we think about the afterlife and the soul. But here we have Socrates at the end of his life. If we actually went back earlier, we'd have a completely different philosophy here. One that precisely loves life, one that adores the world. And it's the same thing that Nietzsche says as well about Christ, that he died too young, and that if only he lived longer, then he would end up with a completely different philosophy of doing things. So then Nietzsche thinks also about, in part one, what happens when we remove the metaphysical way of doing things. What happens if we just remove God from the equation? What is all the focus going to be upon? Humanity. Okay, we've got the whole movement back towards the human again. Then what have we got is a problem. We've ultimately got the massive psychological problems that humans have. So then Nietzsche is no way an idiot at this point. He thinks, well, if we remove the religious aspect from how we create new things, new values, new ideas, new knowledge, new ethical principles, and so on, if we move this back to a completely human way of doing things, then we're going to have all the problems that that's going to entail. So what do we have as humanity's problems is that of egoism, narcissism, and the whole idea of wanting to control the herd and people, and a despotic type of mentality that happens as well, in the sense of when we want to have a creative person, as he says, you've got to break away from the norms, break away from how people think about things, and want to do things in your own way. And so it's like the whole argument of, I'm not going to listen to what you're going to tell me, I'm not going to accept what you're going to say to me, I'm going to go do things my way. And you sort of make yourself an outsider and a social outcast in a way from wanting to do things in a very productive, creative way for yourself. And then it's that whole idea of having the knock-on effect of becoming spiteful and hatred towards other people that happens through becoming an outsider and sort of an outcast and an exile, all these good concepts, through that action of wanting to create something new and different. And then you get into the whole idea of, well, that person can then have a potentially massive ego about themselves. Everything that they produce, everything that they do will be absolutely fantastic to them, because who's there to tell them otherwise? Who is there to say that they're terrible and everything that they do is complete rubbish? They're not going to listen to anybody. And so you have that massive ego, an incredible amount of narcissism. And then what would happen if that then had a knock-on effect back into everybody else as well, to say, well, I know how to do things better than everybody else does, and what I say goes. And you just think, wow, this is a bit of a butthead of a guy, isn't it? In the sense of, well, they're not allowing for any means of an open discussion or debate or conversation whatsoever. And then we can see the importance of friends that pops into this section as well, and that section on friendship, because what do friends ultimately allow for is us to break out of that egoism and narcissism that takes place. And it's also a great wee way to break into the teaching aspect of doing things as well, where you can have the teachers completely stuck about their own ways, only one way of doing things, and the students absolutely have to do what the teacher says as well. But that's what's so great about Friends, is that they manage to break you out of your rut in a sense of, you have that just wee great sentences, oh, come on, or no, I don't think you're right there. Because, and you have that nice open conversation, open debate about things in a very much sort of positive, friendly manner between yourselves as well. And that allows you to break out of your rut and break out of your egoism. And it's that sort of sense of which we have Zarathustra go back into the mountain again at the end, is to say, well, you love me too much. Once you go and develop your own ideas, you're going to need me again, because you're going to then potentially become a massive butthead and a massive person with an ego. And what I'm going to do is shake you loose from all that again and make you think in a much more productive way by allowing you to have that sense of critical reflection upon your own ideas. And it's that whole sense of critical reflection that then we have the importance into philosophy and the philosophical method as well, is allowing for us to have that constant, continual critical reflection upon how we think about things. And it's also in that way that you can say, well, the way in which you can be critical can be really harmful, to the sense of you can be incredibly self-critical to the point you become absolutely depressed and think everything you do is absolutely terrible. But it's also in the sense of you shouldn't go that far, in the sense of it's always just a pinch of allowing ourselves never to become completely absurdly egotistical and almost a despot within your own ideas of doing things, and to always try to be open and allow yourself to take other opinions on board, even if you disagree with them, and allow ourselves and our opinions to change over time. And then we sort of can allow ourselves to come back to the idea of that childlike creation again, because we think of creation in so much adult sense of the word. And what I mean by that is we sort of have the idea of grown-ups and models and structures of knowledge, let's say, affect how we think in such a concrete way that what we think are absolutely fantastic, great individuals are people who are able to do fantastic things with those structures of knowledge. Let's say, like musicians are able to absolutely do fantastic things within the confines of whatever structure it is they're working within. But Nietzsche's almost like, well, childlike creation is to kind of forget about all those rules that's been placed upon us, all those structures. Not to say that knowledge itself and learning about those things is completely important, but just not allowing yourself to be so confined and so rigid within the space allows for that sort of creative process to take place. And when we do so, then we allow this sort of ideality to a sort of emerge about things, and newness to emerge. And what do I mean by ideality is in that sense of once you break away from how things are actually done, you move into the sort of creative ideal space within your own mind and whatever you're doing as well, and to then create just a little bit of a different flavor for yourself of how to do things. And it can be completely purely by accident as well. Let's say we're cooking and something accidentally falls in the pot, and then it's too late because it's already mixed itself in, and then completely by accident you discover to yourself, oh, actually accidentally knocking those couple of herbs in there absolutely works completely perfectly. Wow, I didn't even realize that. And it's to affirm all those little novelties about things as well, and chance for Nietzsche that we ultimately take on a complete unnoticed sort of way about doing things that really adds flavor and makes the difference to us on an everyday sense of things. And of course, those novelties can be things that are really just annoy the living pants off of you as well. And to say, well, you can have, let's say, one day where you have breakfast and you burn the toast, the next day you're getting dressed and you button up a shirt too fast and you do it wrong, you have to do it again. Next day, you accidentally start stepping dog mess and that on the pavement. And it's like constant day after day of absolutely one annoying thing happening after another. But really, it's those novelties and those little things that are so important as well, especially in an everyday sense of it. Even if it annoys us so immensely, especially like you say, you're driving and someone cuts you off, you're going to lose your absolute plot at them. But it's those little things and those novelties that precisely make up every single day that's different for us. And what do we not want, of course, is that hellish idea of a repetition of exactly the same thing over and over again. What does repetition ultimately should affirm is all that idea of chance and novelty and difference allowing to continually affect us and what we do in our lives. And through all that affirmation of novelty and difference, then we are able to have that little spontaneous acts of creativity that happen even completely unbeknownst to us as well, that then has an immense impact upon exactly what we do and what we think and how we go about things. And the complete opposite way of doing things, what we don't want, is you could say, well, at least from a traditional sense, what do you not want is that continual repetition of exactly doing the same things, thinking the same way, constantly adhering to the same structures. Only one person's got the best idea for doing things. And it's that whole horrible ideas as well. You can go into, well, what happens if we only thought like they did in like the 50s or some, whatever time period you want to put, and say, well, this is what we're going to use. Imagine if everybody thought like this continually throughout time. And then you just think to yourself, oh my God, there would be absolutely no progress in ideas, no progress in ethics, no progress at all, because everybody's so much focused upon just one specific thing. So it's kind of interesting as well, the fact that creativity is based upon this whole idea of being childlike, in the sense of that it's really arguing, almost Nietzsche's saying from his own position, that once we have sort of the burdens of doing things, and then we have this whole sense of battling with values and challenging how things are done, it's almost like, well, we can hold up people who do great battles and are great warriors that challenge ideas and history and how we think about things. But the people who then create new concepts and ideas are the ones that are after those people. And it's almost like the sense of Nietzsche himself, maybe even without thinking as well, because he's very much the sense of, you should always overcome me, you should always challenge what I say. And then saying, well, it's a philosophy for the future, because what Nietzsche's doing is he's the one that's trying to do battle with the previous way of doing things, and traditionally focused on metaphysics, focused on the whole process towards the soul and the afterlife and death, at least within philosophy, focused on the mind rather than the body. And it's almost like, well, after this, then this will open the door for people to then create a new way of thinking about things and new concepts and ideas as well. It's almost like you've got to have a good battle, and you've got to have your good set of warriors to do battle before creativity and new concepts and so forth can emerge from all that. You've got to have the people that open the door for you, basically. And you have to allow for that door to be open. So it's almost like those two things have to take place. First, you have to see the fact that there's a blockage and the door is being slammed there. Why is that the case? Why is it not allowing it to be moved and challenged and experimented with as an idea? What can we do to make this move and work and be more practical and more factual as an idea? And then through that, then you start to open the door. You start to then move towards progressing it and advancing it. And then finally, when the door is open, all those people can then say, well, I've done the work. And then everybody can then start thinking and moving in a different way of doing things. And of course, that's all stuff that doesn't happen immediately. It's stuff that can take hundreds of years and so forth all to occur. And of course, the whole point of that is, well, don't we want that as an idea within philosophy in the first place, to always move towards that whole sense of continual openness and debate and challenging our ideas. And there's always that point that Nietzsche says as well, it's always great to have all that, but at the same time we've always got to have the focus upon what actually matters in each given battle. Let's say, what's the thing that always matters is that move towards the earth, move towards the world, our bodies, and as long as we have a focus on that, then we'll be okay in the end of doing things. Because so much, you can say, people get too caught up in the ideas of moving towards ideality, moving towards perfection, that you become so enamored almost with the ideality that's been created that the world itself becomes almost dreamlike and sort of like a phantasmagoria of doing things. And it's precisely that concept of phantasmagoria where it's a sequence of real or imaginary images like that seen in a dream, and it's, you want never to ever think about reality in a dream-like state and where everything always becomes like a dream, because then we lose sense of the importance of reality itself, and all what we get is all this lavish dream-like world that's presented to us rather than reality itself. And then of course, you can get into the whole sense of, well, within philosophy, at least as an idea, what do we have as more or less like a matrix-like argument that's held to be better than reality itself? In the sense of the movie The Matrix with Keanu Reeves has this whole sense of a virtual reality construct having been created by machines that use humans as batteries basically to power everything. Because what's happened in the movie is like in a post-apocalyptic future where machines have overcome man and have won, and humanity doesn't know that they're in this dreamlike state, but a pocket of resistance somehow have managed to escape this virtual reality construct and see everything for how it actually is, that in fact the machines have been running everything and people have been used as batteries. And it's a sense of, well, here you never want to be caught up in thinking about the world just purely in the sense of allowing us to have this whole dreamlike quality about the world, and that it's too beautiful and it's too fantastic and gorgeous. We always want to have that sense of Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, sort of becoming ejected out of that, back into the harshness of reality, back into the real world in the movie. And that's sort of what Nietzsche says as well in part one, that on the one hand, we have all the fantastic things about creativity, and we almost need that move towards an ideality in the first place in order to create anything, because if we don't, then we're just bogged down by the problems of everyday life and other people continually affecting how we think, and just nothing gets done, basically. So you need to create a space and get away from everything that's causing you hassle and move towards the ideal in order for us to have any sort of semblance of creation whatsoever. And then from all that, you've not got to forget about the importance of reality. So it's in the sense of that the artist has got to sort of move into the sort of dreamlike state about doing things, but at the same time be pulled back into the real world and not forget about all the problems and things, and making us think more critically about things on a deeper level within reality itself, because that's what's so great about what this move towards ideality does, is it allows us to reflect upon very simply the problem that's actually there within reality or within the world, and that was normally covered up as well by whatever it is, problems politically, socially, culturally, all that. We can get rid of all that mess basically, just get a nice clear and concise picture of exactly what is the problem, of what is the idea, why is it factual, what is affecting us, why is it a problem in the first place. All these things just through touching upon that ideal and then allowing us to think about that problem on a deeper sense within the context of the world at the same time. Many thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed my general discussion about what's been covered in part 1 of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Feel free to drop me an email at my address dissectingphilosophy@gmail.com, and I can be also found on Twitter at I am a rubberman. Many thanks for listening, and I'll hope you'll join me next time.